Hi, you've probably noticed that this is not our classroom, this is my house. That's because your very, very smart teacher forgot to hit record on the video camera. It was all set up and everyone thought it was recording and I thought it was recording even though I'm the one that forgot to hit record. So I feel a little guilty, and this lesson is really important and I wanted you to have it. So I decided to record it here at home for your benefit. So remember, one of the things that I want for you to be able to do at the end of the semester is to go from the beginning of Genesis all the way to the end of the Old Testament and connect all of the pieces seamlessly and know why one thing started and the other one began. So here we go. Creation, the fall, the flood, the Tower of Babel. Genesis 12 is about a man, Abraham. He receives a call from God. It is a four-part promise from him. Land, descendants, blessing, and a great name. Those are the four promised things. Abraham has two sons. The oldest is Ishmael. The youngest is Isaac. Isaac is the son of the promise. His wife Sarah is the mother of Isaac, and you remember the whole story with Hagar. Isaac has two sons. You remember the twins, Esau and Jacob, and the stealing of the birthright and everything. And therefore Jacob, who is the youngest, is the child of the promise there. And in all of these instances, God renews his covenant with Isaac, and then he comes back and renews his covenant with Jacob. So you always hear in the Old Testament the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob is the one that during the renewal of the covenant, you remember at Bethel where he first had the dream of Jacob's ladder, the angels going up and down. He is renamed Israel. Jacob has 12 sons, therefore Israel's sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. That's where it originates. You've heard that all your life. So Jacob's youngest son is Joseph, and Joseph was favored by his father. You remember Joseph's coat of many colors. Joseph is so important. He is given chapter 37 through chapter 50 of Genesis is Joseph's story. Joseph is very significant to Genesis and to the Bible. Joseph ends up in Egypt. Why? He is sold by his jealous brothers into slavery into Egypt. The rest of the family ends up in Egypt also after a while. Why? Because of a famine. They all go, and actually they go down to Egypt. So here we are at the end of Genesis. Hey, we just did all of Genesis. Tonight, I want you to try to do that. Try to do all of Genesis. And then when you finish Genesis, try to do all of Exodus and all of the little high points of Leviticus that I'm going to give you today. So, everyone is in Egypt, and that's where we begin in Exodus. So, in Exodus, 400 years have passed. And so the last we saw of the Israelites, they were in Egypt, favored by Pharaoh because of Joseph. Now here's Exodus, they're enslaved. Oh, how do we connect that? Generations, many years passed, and it says a king came into power that did not remember Joseph. And because God had blessed these people, because their descendants were going to be many, they multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, and there were many Hebrews, many Israelites. And so after 400 years, they became enslaved. At some point, the king said, they're too numerous. They're going to overcome us, who are Egyptians. And so they treated them harshly and put slave masters over them, and they became the workers of Egypt. That's how we connect Genesis to Exodus. So then we have Moses, and Daniel taught you about Moses and how he was spared by being sent adrift in a basket. Another form of population control, that the Pharaoh had ordered the killing of the sons. He probably ordered the killing of sons because sons grow up to be men who can fight wars. That's why he didn't order the killing of girls, probably. Girls wouldn't do that. So, here we we go, and we have Moses, and you know the story of Moses growing up in Pharaoh's household. You remember him running away after murdering an Egyptian. You know of coming back to Egypt. You know of the 10 plagues. I want you to remember that the last plague was the killing of the firstborn, and it is the beginning of Passover. It is the Passover, which will become very, very significant for Jews and in our Christian tradition also. Then there is this escape of Egypt, crossing of the Red Sea, where the people come, and here we go. They're in Mount Sinai, and Moses goes up the mountain and receives the 10 Commandments. He comes down and tells the people about the 10 Commandments, and remember, not just the 10 Commandments, but the covenant case laws also. And you remember the ceremonies that sealed the covenant, the ceremony of food and the ceremony of the sprinkling of blood. So here we are in Exodus 25. And I want you to remember these couple of verses that I'm going to read to you. You may not be able to read the screen on this video, but I hope that you got the handout that has all these little PowerPoint screens, and you can follow along that way. Exodus 24 verse 3 says, "When Moses went and told the people all the words and laws, they responded with one voice, 'Everything the Lord has said we will do.'" Again in verse 7, that he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Skip down to verse 18. "Then Moses entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So one of the questions during our class was, if Moses had already gotten the 10 Commandments and the laws from God, why did he go back up the mountain, as this says? Well, Scripture tells us why. Chapters 25 through 31 of Exodus are about when Moses went back up these 40 days and 40 nights. He was receiving from God instructions on how to build the tabernacle and how to build the things that he was going to put in the tabernacle. So chapters 25 through 31 of Exodus are instructions on the tabernacle that God is giving to Moses during these 40 days that Moses is up on the mountain. When Moses went up, he did not tell the Israelites, "Hey, I'm going to be gone 40 days." So the people down there don't know what's going on, don't know when he will be back, and frankly, they don't know what to do. And as we know from Scripture in Exodus 32, what do? With Aaron's leadership, they collect all their old jewelry and they melt it down and they fashion a golden calf and they bow down and they worship it. Remember the verse I just read to you? Everything that you have said we will do. Oh, how quickly they turned away from the laws that God had given them. And when Moses comes down from his 40 days and 40 nights up in the clouds, face to face with God, and he sees that they are bowed down worshiping a golden calf, he is so angered that he takes the tablets and he throws them in his anger and they shatter. And you know that later on God will have to give him 2 new tablets. And there's supposed to be some irony and some comedy in there also. But it's incredible that the laws that God has just given, they quickly break. The same way that in his anger, Moses breaks the actual stones that have the laws written on them. And we know that it is because that they broke, they fashioned the golden calf, that 3,000 men are killed because of that. And so we have the beginning of punishment from God at that point, because they have sinned. They have sinned greatly by worshiping an idol. And God is saying, you know, this covenant, it's not like the Noah covenant. It's not like, you know, the other covenants that we talked about that are promissory. This covenant was an if-then covenant. If you obey my commands, then da-da-da-da-da. If you don't obey my commands, it's not the same way. there's going to be punishments. There's going to be heartache. And that's where it all begins. Chapters 32 through 40, Exodus ends at chapter 40. So chapter 32 through 40 of Exodus are when Moses comes down and he actually tells the people the instructions that God had given him on the tabernacle, and they actually begin construction and they build the tabernacle, and they build all the things that will go into the tabernacle. The tabernacle, you have probably heard of that word. You've probably heard the word tent of meeting, which is synonymous with tabernacle. But what was the purpose of it? Why would God spend so much time telling Moses how to build this, and why would they go through this whole effort of building the tabernacle? This is the first part in even our Christian history that we see a place, a physical place where people will come to worship God. And remember that the Israelites are different from the other surrounding nations, that they are choosing to worship one God. And so by building this tabernacle, by telling them to worship there, God is centering them. And he is literally building a house where he can dwell among his people. So the tabernacle is the first kind of picture we get for what we have today, our sanctuary at church. Jews have the synagogue. Later we have Solomon's temple, and you know of all that. So this is the first glimpse we have of those things. The next picture you have is of the tabernacle outline. It's a little bit of a blue square, but I want to show you a better handout that you have that you can refer to at home. It's a sheeted part, and it's in color, and it goes like this. And inside is the tabernacle, and there's little red dots with some numbers on these sheets. The next sheet you have is it's black and white, and it's attached with a paper clip. It looks like this, and it says key to the tabernacle. So on here, on your colored two sheets that go like this, you can find a red number, like over the altar there's a number, and then you can go to your key and find the same number, and there'll be an explanation, a detailed explanation of what that is, what its purpose was. And this is for you at home to really discover the temple, the tabernacle in more detail. So I want to kind of walk you through the tabernacle and tell you what was in each room, and then after that I'll tell you what specifically those things were for. So the tabernacle had kind of three different locations. It had a courtyard, which is right here, and then it had a bigger room, which was called the holy place, and then it had a smaller, more intimate room at the very back, and that was called the Holy of Holies. And you have heard that before. I know that you have. The courtyard was a place where it was open. There was no covering over it. It was just open. And it was a place where people could come and offer animal sacrifices for whatever offerings they were giving. And we'll talk more about offerings when we get deeper into Leviticus. But the second thing is the holy place, and that's actually going to be entering into the covered area. The holy place was a place where the priests entered every morning for prayer and to offer incense offerings and for worship. The Holy of Holies, which was at the far, far back, it was a place where the Ark of the Covenant was. It was only entered once a year by the high priest, and that was to offer a redemption offering for the people so that they could be redeemed from their sins, and that was once a year for the sins of the whole year. And we'll talk more about that. But those are the three kind of